All right, so are you ready to dive into this Winchester Mystery House thing?
Oh, yeah, I've been looking forward to this one all week.
Me too.
Yeah.
I gotta say, these articles you sent over are pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of a house like that,
A house built by the Winchester rifle heiress.
Right, exactly. A house with staircases that lead to nowhere and doors that open onto walls.
It's like something out of a dream or a nightmare or something.
Well, and that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing, right? We've got wealth, we've got mystery, maybe even a touch of the supernatural.
It's all there.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, I think we got to start with Sarah herself. Who was she before she became the Mystery House lady?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Before all the, spooky stuff.
Exactly. So Sarah Winchester was born in 1839.
Back when women weren't exactly encouraged to be architects.
Right. Not exactly a time for, women to be leading these huge construction projects.
And this wasn't just some little remodel she was doing.
No, this was a massive undertaking. She poured a huge chunk of her life and fortune into this house.
And she inherited a significant portion of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, right?
Yeah, that's right. When her husband William passed away. And it wasn't just money she was throwing at it. She was deeply involved in the design and the construction.
Which is pretty incredible when you think about it. A woman in the late 1800s calling the shots on a project of this scale.
Yeah, that really challenges the image of the frail, grieving widow that's often portrayed.
This was a woman who knew what she wanted.
And wasn't afraid to make it happen. So yeah, definitely a fascinating figure.
But you mentioned tragedy earlier.
Yeah.
What exactly happened in Sarah's life that might have led her down this unusual path?
Well, Sarah and William, they lost their only child.
Oh, God.
A daughter named Annie when she was just a baby. And then within a few years, Sarah lost her husband, her mother, and her father-in-law.
Wow, that's a lot of loss to deal with in such a short period of time.
It's unimaginable, really. And it was around this time that spiritualism was gaining popularity.
Oh, yeah, spiritualism.
Especially among the Victorian elite.
For those who might not be familiar, what exactly did that entail?
Oh, it was this belief that you could communicate with the spirits of the dead.
Through, mediums and seances.
Exactly. It was seen as a way to find comfort and guidance from loved ones who had passed on.
And this wasn't just some fringe belief system, right?
Oh, no, not at all. It was a mainstream movement, embraced even by some scientists and intellectuals.
Wow, so it really was woven into the fabric of Victorian culture.
Absolutely. There were books, journals, public demonstrations, the whole 9 yards.
So it's not hard to imagine that Sarah, having experienced so much loss, might have turned to spiritualism for some kind of solace.
It's a very plausible theory. And when you consider that context, the Winchester Mystery House starts to look a little different.
Okay, I'm sensing a but coming.
Okay. Well, while Sarah's grief and the prevalence of spiritualism certainly offer some insight, there's a danger in oversimplifying the narrative.
Like reducing her to just a heartbroken widow desperately trying to appease ghosts.
Right. We have to remember that this is also a woman of great wealth and ambition, living in a time of unprecedented technological advancement and social change.
So maybe there's more to the story than just spooky seances and haunted blueprints.
Maybe the house itself represents something more.
Okay, now you got me really intrigued. Let's dive into that a little deeper.
Let's do it. Okay, so one of the most persistent myths about the Winchester Mystery House is that Sarah, built constantly to appease the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles.
Like she was trying to outrun some ghostly deadline or something.
Hey, always building, always adding on to keep those spirits at bay.
It's a pretty dramatic image for sure.
And it really plays into that, that whole haunted house vibe.
But you're saying it's not entirely true.
Well, not exactly. The idea that a medium told Sarah to never stop building comes from a book that was published decades after her death.
So no first-hand accounts or anything like that?
No, not really. And there's no reliable evidence to support that claim at all.
Interesting. Okay, but what about the continuous construction itself? I mean, did she really never take a break from building?
Well, no, not really. Records actually show that construction was halted multiple times, sometimes for months at a stretch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for various reasons. Sarah's health, sometimes she was traveling. And then, of course, there was the 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
Oh, yeah, the earthquake.
Yeah.
That must have really done a number on the house.
Absolutely. A 7-story tower collapsed. An entire wing was destroyed. It was a pretty significant event.
So some of those weird features like the doors that open onto walls and the staircases leading to ceilings could actually be the result of earthquake damage.
Exactly. It's not necessarily intentional design, but rather, remnants of that disaster.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a natural disaster literally reshaped the narrative of the house.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of amazing when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we need to consider the historical context, when we're analyzing these seemingly bizarre elements.
Okay, but what about all the other weird stuff? Like the whole number 13 thing, the secret passages, the seances. Surely those can't all be blamed on an earthquake.
Well, let's take those one at a time. First, the number 13. While it's true that the house has some features incorporating that number, like, there are 13 hooks in a closet, things like that.
Right.
There's no evidence that Sarah was particularly fixated on it. In fact, many of those elements were added after her death.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Probably to play up the spooky factor for tourists.
Makes sense. What about the secret passages, though? I mean, were those just a way to get around construction zones after the earthquake?
That's possible.
Huh.
But they could also have been a way for Sarah to move around the house discreetly, especially as her health declined and she became more reclusive.
Because this was her private world, right?
Exactly, her sanctuary. And she may have wanted ways to navigate it without being seen or disturbed.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, final myth busting around the seances. Did Sarah really hold nightly rituals to commune with the spirits?
That's a tough one. While spiritualism was definitely part of the Victorian zeitgeist, there's no concrete evidence that Sarah herself held seances in the house. Her staff never mentioned it, and the room, often cited as the seance room, was actually used by the gardener.
So another case of embellishment for the sake of a good story.
Most likely. But here's the thing. Even if we strip away all the ghost stories and the sensationalized accounts, we're still left with a remarkably unique structure. And that, to me, is the real mystery.
Yeah, I agree. If it wasn't all about appeasing spirits, then what was driving Sarah's architectural vision? What was she trying to create?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And one that takes us beyond, simple myth-busting and into a much more intriguing territory.
Okay, lead the way. I'm ready for it.
All right, so let's consider this. Sarah lived in a time of incredible change. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Technology was rapidly evolving. Traditional beliefs were being challenged by new scientific discoveries. There was a sense of both wonder and anxiety in the air.
And how does that connect to the house?
Well, maybe the house wasn't just a reflection of Sarah's grief or her supposed spiritual beliefs, but a physical manifestation of that broader cultural tension. The clash between the old and the new, the rational and the mystical.
So she's saying the house is like a three-dimensional representation of the Victorian psyche.
It's a fascinating possibility, right? On one hand, you have these elaborate Victorian details, the intricate carvings, the stained glass windows, all very traditional elements. But then you have these jarring, unconventional features. The dead ends, the seemingly nonsensical layouts, almost like a rejection of traditional architectural norms.
It's like she was deliberately subverting expectations, creating a space that was both familiar and unsettling at the same time.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Sarah's personality. This is a woman who defied societal expectations by taking charge of this massive construction project. Perhaps she was doing the same thing with her architectural vision, pushing boundaries, exploring new possibilities.
I like that. It paints her as more of a visionary, a creative force, rather than just a recluse lost in her own world.
And it opens up a whole new way of looking at the house. What if those staircases leading to nowhere weren't mistakes or attempts to confuse spirits, but deliberate design choices meant to challenge our perceptions of space and movement?
Whoa, okay, now, that is mind-blowing. So instead of seeing the house as a haunted labyrinth, we could see it as a kind of architectural experiment, a playground for Sarah's creative impulses.
Exactly. And maybe the real mystery lies not in the supernatural, but in the mind of a woman who was ahead of her time.
It makes me think about those colorful windows that were never even installed. It's almost like she was collecting pieces of art, incorporating them into her ever-evolving creation.
It's a beautiful image, and it reminds us that we're only seeing a fraction of what Sarah envisioned. Who knows what other treasures and secrets are hidden within those walls?
Okay, I'm officially hooked on this theory, but we're running out of time and there's still so much to unpack.
Right.
What are your final thoughts on Sarah and her enigmatic creation?
Wow, so we've gone from ghosts and hauntings to earthquakes and like a whole Victorian architecture revolution.
And all in under an hour. Right. This deep dive has definitely taken some unexpected turns.
That's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where they're going to lead.
So true. We've debunked some myths,
Yeah.
looked at the historical context, even talked about the psychological impact of Sarah's, personal tragedies.
But you know what stands out to me?
What's that?
It's this idea that Sarah wasn't just reacting to everything that happened to her.
Like she wasn't just passively letting life happen to her.
Exactly. She was actively shaping it. She was taking control.
And the Winchester Mystery House is proof of that.
Right. It's not just a collection of oddities. It's a testament to her agency, to her creativity, to her willingness to break the mold.
Makes you wonder what would have happened if she had been born in a different time.
In a society that, actually encouraged women to pursue their passions.
Right. Like, what if she'd had formal training in architecture? Could you imagine the amazing things she could have created?
It's a really interesting thought.
It's like the house is a glimpse into an alternate reality where Sarah's talents were fully recognized and nurtured.
And that makes all those, illogical design choices even more fascinating.
Because if we let go of the idea that she was trying to confuse spirits...
Then what was she trying to achieve with those unconventional spaces?
Right. It's a good question. One of the articles you sent mentioned that some architectural historians think Sarah was influenced by the arts and crafts movement.
Oh, that's a great point. The arts and crafts movement was all about simplicity and functionality and a connection to nature.
And wasn't it a reaction against the, mass production and industrialization of the Victorian era?
Exactly.
So maybe Sarah was trying to create a space that felt handcrafted and personal and unique.
Like a refuge from the hustle and bustle of the outside world.
A sanctuary, almost. It's like those winding hallways and hidden rooms are a metaphor for the complexities of Sarah's own life.
Her grief, her resilience, her desire to create something meaningful.
I think it's really beautiful in a way.
It is. It speaks to the human spirit, our ability to find beauty and meaning even in the face of tragedy.
So where does this leave us? Have we finally solved the mystery of the Winchester Mystery House?
Maybe not entirely. But I think we've come to a much deeper understanding of Sarah Winchester.
The woman behind the myth.
Exactly. And the complex forces that shaped her vision.
And that in itself is a pretty incredible journey.
It's a reminder that the best deep dives don't always provide clear-cut answers.
But they always leave you wanting to know more.
So to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Winchester Mystery House.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering those hidden stories that are all around us.
And until next time, happy exploring.
See ya.